Welcome to our weekly podcast here with Charlie Giroux and what we call What Really Matters. And what really matters this week is leadership. That's the big word that we have for you. And I was looking the other day, Charlie, at a comment that John Quincy Adams once made, the former president and senator here in our country. And he said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, you're a leader. You're running to be a leader here in Pennsylvania in terms of being a governor. And I guess I want to ask you, there's a thirst today, I think, for leadership. We don't see it around us as much as we want to, especially in our leaders. We see a lot of polls that talk about our political leaders and people aren't trusting them as much as they should. What do you do? Where do you start in terms of providing great leadership for Pennsylvania?
It's a great question, but I have to say something about the quote, because as you know, Gary, I love quotes. We feature one every morning on our little breakfast briefing, and I take a lot of time to develop those, and one of my favorite quotes is the one that you just read.
Right.
And what Adam said is really at the core of leadership. It's the ability to inspire people and to bring out from within them the potential that they have. A lot of people think, and you and I have both been involved in sports for
Right.
a long time, that leadership is yelling and screaming and telling people where to go. It's not at all. The model that works, both on a very human level and on an institutional level, is servant leadership, is inspiring people to do their best, to develop their potential, and to helping them get there, showing them the way, but not dragging them, but rather following them or being in their wake alongside of them.
What's fascinating to me is you hear a lot of political types talk about being a public servant, but it ends at the words. It doesn't really show up in the actions. And I think that's where people want to see their leaders today, people who truly are servants to the people. And your motto for your campaign is from the people, for the people. How do you demonstrate it? And what kind of things do you do and have done over the years to show that you truly are a leader?
Well, a couple of ways, Gary, and you're absolutely right. We hear, I'm made for public service. That's a big red flag to me always. When I hear that coming out of the candidate's mouth, I worry, because generally that's code word for I just want to do this, and it's an ego trip or an opportunity to advance your career or something like that. Real leadership begins with listening. Right. Begins with listening to the people, hearing what they need, what they want, what their hopes and dreams are, and then figuring out ways to help them fulfill them. And you look around Pennsylvania right now, and we see our economy in bad shape, largely because of Joe Biden. We're taping this on the 1-year anniversary of Joe Biden coming into the White House. And you have to ask yourself what Ronald Reagan used to ask: are you better off today than you were 375 or 380 days ago? And the answer is pretty clear. So who's going to provide the leadership to get our economy back on track? Who's going to lead that fight? Who's going to take us to where we need to go? We now have an opportunity, as you know, the day before the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, to scale back Roe versus Wade significantly and allow the states to develop their own rules. Who's going to lead that fight for the unborn? That's where leadership really hits the road. And that's where my campaign is centered, on taking a campaign from the people. That's where I come from, for the people, and developing an agenda, working with others, building coalitions, and making it work.
What really matters in terms of leadership? I think people want to be inspired, but they also want to be independent, or do they? We worry right now in these times of COVID, and we've seen over the last year or two with our governor, where he's talked to us, but not so much with us. And so many people have run to the government, much as, the Cowardly Lion and Dorothy and them ran to Oz and to see the answers, when the answers many times are here to ourselves. And so many times I think when government promises on this 1-year anniversary too much, they never are going to be able to deliver on time. How do you find the balance in terms of leadership between making sure that people are being talked with, that they're being provided for, and yet we're not taking away the ability to provide for themselves?
Well, the ability to provide for themselves and develop individual potential is really at the core, Gary. Individual liberty, individual responsibility, which goes with that, is what has made us successful through the years of this great nation. It wasn't big government giving us stuff, pushing us along the way. It was the rugged individualism that built this great country and built a thriving middle class, which is being choked out right now because of both forces of big government and the super rich. And we don't any longer have that individual responsibility, that individual mandate, that individual freedom to pursue our hopes, our dreams, our expectations. And you sit around at the breakfast table now, and the family budget's constantly getting smaller, while government's budget gets bigger. And so I'm a great believer that if you let people keep more of what they earn, for example, and decide for themselves how their money is spent, that we're all going to be better off for it in the long run.
Leaders understand how to unite. We heard President Biden a year ago on that inauguration talk a lot about, I want people who didn't vote for me to know they have a place at the table, that we're working for them too. Unfortunately, a year later, a lot of people feel that he's been a great divider, not a great uniter in that regard. And I think one of the things that people would say, and you read about this in a lot of different publications, is the idea that you're working on an agenda, you're not working on good policy for all the people. How do you bridge that gap as governor?
We're always in campaign mode, Gary.
Right.
And Joe Biden is a prime example. He hasn't gotten over the 2020 elections yet himself. He's still litigating his case for being president. If there's anything worse than a sore loser, it's a sore winner. And I really think that's part of what the Biden pathology boils down to, is that they just want to constantly kick Donald Trump around because they think that that's politically advantageous for them. And they don't really want to solve problems for the American people. That's what leadership is. Leadership is looking forward, not looking backwards. And unfortunately, right now, we have too many folks that want to keep their eyes in the rearview mirror rather than looking down the road and seeing what the potential of our great state and our great country really are and how we can realize that together.
I think one of the other things too, and these are the things that really matter, when you're talking to people and you're saying, okay, and I'm an old coach, I used to look at the score at the end of the game, I knew if we won or we lost, it was pretty definite. But when you have President Biden come out the other day, and I don't mean to beat up on the president right now with all due respect, but
I can.
But the idea that he said the other day, he said, I haven't overpromised, I've over-delivered. And I'm thinking, if you look at all the various things that have happened in the past year, starting with Afghanistan and working your way on down the line, to the way COVID's been dealt with and other things, and the economy and all the various things that are wrong with that. People are tired of having politicians say, I'm a leader, don't believe your lying eyes and ears, believe what I'm telling you. And we're sitting there looking at that and saying, and no one, Democrats or Republicans alike, are sitting back and saying, you've overachieved. That has not been the case. It seems to be one of the things there has to be in the new leadership that we're looking for and talking about today is a humbleness.
Yeah.
Humbleness is missing big time. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it is. And the other thing that's missing is just being straightforward with people.
Thank you.
When you've got quote-unquote leaders telling us that everything's hunky-dory, but we go to the gas pump and realize what it costs to juice up our car. Go to the grocery store, Gary, and if you can even find what you're looking for,
Right.
know that you're paying dramatically more than you were just a short time ago. And then somebody's out there telling you, well, everything's really fine. You know that you're being BS'd. And humility is really at the core. And I've talked about that a lot during the course of this campaign. Now, look, if you run for public office, ipso facto, you have a big ego. You
Right.
can't do it unless you have a big ego. So I live in a land of pretty large egos, and mine's no smaller than anybody else's, Gary. But I really do. I pray every morning that I will have a degree of humility. Some days the good Lord gives me more than
Right.
other days. But the ability to be introspective, the ability to be just a little bit humble, the ability to keep your ego in check. And I think that's really the key. Not that you don't have a large one, but that you keep it in check and that you realize that other people have egos as well and their own hopes and dreams and ambitions, etc. Allows you to surround yourself with people that are better at what they do than you are. Allows you to bring in the brightest and best. Allows you to, as Jim Collins used to say, get the right people on the bus, then get them on the right seats,
Right.
then give them the plan about where you're going. That's true leadership in my book.
I think there's a macro leadership that we're looking forward to from our governors, from our presidents. We don't expect them to know everything there is to know. And unfortunately today, it seems like so many people are trying to say, I know everything, when you really don't.
Right.
And I'm reminded of the old Clint Eastwood movie where he said, a man's got to know his limitations. Okay, I think that's important for all of us, and you're kind of describing that.
Absolutely, Gary. And the more that you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And so I've been learning all my life. I try to learn a little bit every day. And as I do, I realize how much I really don't know.
I know I learned long ago what Winston Churchill once said, my limitations are limitless. So it's, it works like that. Over the years, who have you looked to, who do you look to today in terms of your models for leadership?
Well, I mean, obviously you look to our Lord because that
Right.
was the ultimate model of leadership. And, it sounds somewhat cliche to say that. But some of the great leaders in my life were my dad. I mean, my dad was an amazing man who did amazing things during his life and always showed us the way to be a true leader. And he was a very quiet, very humble, but large and imposing man with a voice that really captured attention. And when he spoke, believe me, people listened, and they had good reason to listen. Of course, my former boss, Ronald Reagan, was a great model and taught me an awful lot about how to lead. And he did it because he was centered on philosophy. He had a smiling face, but a tough hand behind it. He didn't deviate from what he believed was the right thing to do, even when people told him to go in a different direction, including his own advisors. He went with his core philosophy and core beliefs and did it so successfully, and yet he was always able to build coalitions and make things happen for the country, and we saw the results of his doing that. And today, you know, you look around the country, some of the governors that I've said I would try to model, Ron DeSantis in Florida, who showed us how to handle things during the pandemic when Tom Wolf and Josh Shapiro were really messing things up, Kristi Noem in South Dakota, and some others around the nation. I think Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is going to be one that will fall into the same mold that those folks have. I'd like to be able to do that here in Pennsylvania, because I've told people, if they could do it in Virginia, we will do it in Pennsylvania.
We have so many issues confronting the governor comes in now. Talking about Governor Youngkin, the first thing he did was to come in and say, now schools, you can say you're going to wear a mask, you're not going to wear a mask. Parents, you can tell your kids to go in there. If they want to do it, fine. If they don't want to do it, fine. Freedom to the people, and to this idea that leaders are not afraid of the people, that they can trust the people to have a basic understanding of what's going on out there and to do the right thing. That seems to be an important point. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, trusting the people is really, in my judgment, at the core of good leadership. You know, the left seems to view life, Gary, as I've said many times, as a series of problems to be solved by government bureaucrats, folks on the Potomac or here in Harrisburg, so-called experts, where the real experts are the people that are sitting at their family dinner table discussing what's good for them and for their loved ones and making those decisions for themselves. I believe in individual liberty. I think that when folks are allowed more freedom, more flexibility, more ability to make their own decisions and determine their own futures, that we're all better off for it. Societally, we're better off.
As a governor, one of the things that has bothered me a lot are people who say, okay, you come here, we're going to take care of everything for you. And I think that's where that style of governing gets into a problem, because you're saying to people, okay, we're going to end COVID.
Right.
No one's ever going to end COVID. No. COVID's going to be here in some manifestation over the years, much like the flu has been here in some manifestation for a long time. And it's how we live with it endemically. What's the role then of a governor in terms of inspiring others, in terms of the government that he helps to lead or be part of, in terms of talking to people? I saw President Biden yesterday say, well, people are blaming him for not knowing COVID, Omicron was coming or Delta was coming. I don't blame him for that. I blame him for saying we're going to end these things. You can't say things about issues where you really don't have a role to play in them. Talk about the difference between knowing when to get involved and when not to, and when to let it to the people and experts, and when to stay out of it government-wise.
Well, and you can't lead, Gary, from your basement.
Right.
You can't lead hiding behind the walls of the White House. You can't lead from an ivory tower. You've got to be out listening to the people, talking with the people, understanding what's going on every single day. That's really the key to successful leadership. And it's not viewing government as the solution to everything. There used to be a bumper sticker 50 years ago that said, a government big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take it all away. Right. And that's really what happens. Every time that we look to the government to resolve something, a little piece of our freedom gets stripped away. And generally speaking, when that freedom gets stripped away, it doesn't come back. So, Franklin was right. If you're willing to sacrifice freedom for temporary safety or anything else, you deserve neither, and you'll get neither in the long run.
And speaking of comments, Ronald Reagan once said, when the government comes to your door and said, we're here to help,
run.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But the idea, too, we've heard this a lot in the last couple of years with COVID on the various issues, and government seems to always come to us in some manifestation and say to us, we got to do something. And again, run. I mean, because they don't always have to do something. Sometimes the best thing you can do is get out of the way. As an old coach, I used to know sometimes when to get out of the way of my kids and when to help them. And I think it's important for a governor to know when to get out of the way and when to help people, but at the same time, always try to inspire, always try to somehow lead, but leading may take different forms in different moments.
Well, you and I are both old coaches.
Yes.
And on the basketball court, I saw that many, many times where sometimes you had to interject and get right in the middle of a conversation with your players. Sometimes you just had to let them go. They knew, if they were well prepared, what to do. And then it was just a matter of doing the work. I think most people know, either instinctively or because of experience, what the right thing to do for themselves and their family is. I reject out of hand this notion that there are experts that know better than we. I just completely and totally reject that idea. There was a great conversation a number of years ago between Bill Bennett and some national reporter and some quote-unquote expert on education. And Bennett said, "Do you really mean to tell me that you folks, bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., know better for me and my family how to educate my children?" I said, "Well, you were the Secretary of Education, maybe not you," but he said, "No, if I was just, lunch pail Larry, do you really think that you know better?" And the guy said, "Well, yes, we do." And Bennett just let a pregnant pause go for a minute, and he said, "Tell me their names." And I think that really summarizes the entire issue. If you don't know the people, if you don't listen to them, if you don't truly understand them, you can't possibly be making judgments for them. And no government official can do that, no matter how well intended or how hard they try. They're not going to be able to do better than parents for their children, than families for themselves, etc.
The words with and to come to mind. We've been talked to by our governor an awful lot in the last couple of years, especially with COVID. A lot of people now have a lot of resentment built up over that, probably wouldn't go back to do it the same way. In talking with you over the years, you've talked with people. I watch you. You talk with people. You want to hear what people have to say, even though it may not be exactly what you want to hear. I used to watch you on your TV program. You talk with people who you disagreed with, but it was always in a good way. But I always sensed that you were listening for a better idea. I know you're a Republican. I know you're a conservative. But you're also a guy that's not afraid of the solution if it happens to be somewhere in between there. Talk a little bit about that in terms of leadership.
Well, I think that's a key to leadership, is the ability to really listen, not just to hear the words going one side and out the other, but to really listen and to not only hear the words, but get the flavor, understand what's really at the heart of what somebody's discussing with you. And I have learned a lot from others, and I hope to learn a lot more, because I don't think I have all the answers. I think I've got a philosophy about government. I think I have a philosophy about leadership, and I think I have the tools to do a really good job for the people of Pennsylvania, but I surely don't have all the answers. There certainly are people out there that I would choose to surround myself with who are better at what they do than I am, who have particular expertise. But it's not just those with expertise, quote unquote. It's regular folks, and I'm out every single day, Gary, as you know, with my ear to the ground, but more importantly, close to people, listening to what they have to say, because ultimately, government is supposed to be of the people, for the people, by the people, and that's what we're trying to build in this campaign.
As you have listened to people across the state, and I'm sure you've heard leadership over and over again, is there any one story, is there any one thing that has been said to you that really kind of was poignant, that hit you and you said, oh, wow, they really have the idea?
Well, I think it's more what they don't want. And they
Okay.
don't want the model that Tom Wolfe foisted upon them. I hear that everywhere, that we're capable of making our own decisions. We don't need mandates. We don't need restrictions. We don't need lockdowns. We don't need orders and edicts, et cetera, to run our lives and to run them safely, efficiently, healthily, et cetera. And I think that's really the number one story, the number one issue, the number one thing that I've heard all across Pennsylvania.
Well, it's been great talking with you again today, and I know one of the things you want to do is continue to hear from people, and you have done something unique in this campaign, and I love to end every one of these podcasts with this, because you're the only campaign guy that I know of so far, the only gubernatorial candidate who's putting your phone number out there. And I'm not talking about the one where your secretaries answer, I'm talking about the one where you answer.
Yeah, I don't think any candidate for statewide office, Gary, has ever put their personal cell phone out before every Pennsylvanian.
Right.
13 million people have access to me by my personal cell phone, which is stuck in my pocket every day. And I want people to call. I've gotten a couple of calls saying, oh my gosh, it's really you. And I'm like, well, who were you expecting? Because I'm picking up the phone and I'm going to listen. And the calls have been remarkably respectful, insightful, giving me good information, good thoughts. Nobody's called up and been a crank caller. We've gotten really, really good calls. So I'm happy to give it again. It's 717-877-8194. 717-877-8194.
Charlie Giroux, you want to get some ideas to him? You want to talk with him? You want to converse with him a little bit? Cut through all the bureaucracy and all the red tape, and you go to 717-877-8194. When we get together next time, we're going to talk about a store called Pennsylvania, and we're going to do it right here on the things that really matter. What matters? Find out in our conversations with Charlie Giroux. He's running for governor in the state of Pennsylvania. See you next time.
Businessman, conservative, patriot, Charlie Giroux for governor.